It is to be the seat of legislation and of the administration of justice for this metropolis, when it will have reached its destined populousness, and it is therefore to be erected on a scale worthy of the uses for which it is intended. D.C. Mayor Samuel Smallwood, on inviting citizens to the laying of the cornerstone, August 22, 1820. Today, 200 years later, we celebrate this historic building that is now a home for our local courts and was a home to many local, federal, and government agencies throughout its history. But how did this historic courthouse, with its grand columns, marble floors, and hallowed halls, first built as the district city hall, come into existence? On December 1st, 1800, Congress created the District of Columbia as the seat of national government. And just a few months later, on February 27, 1801, President John Adams signed into law a bill establishing the Circuit Court of the District of Columbia, the very first court for the new district. In 1820, money was allocated to build D.C. a city hall, the first building constructed for D.C. by the federal government, and George Hadfield, architect for the U.S. Capitol, was chosen to design the new city hall. The cornerstone was placed on July 14, 1820, and the ceremony celebrating this occasion was held on August 22nd. By all accounts, it was a very hot day in D.C., but hundreds of citizens turned out to see this grand new building, standing tall on what would become Judiciary Square. Although the building was originally designed as D.C. City Hall, space was found for the District Circuit Court. Before finding its permanent home, the Circuit Court had many locations and was essentially homeless for many years. Finally, in 1823, a courtroom was provided to the Circuit Court in the new City Hall. The early Circuit Court's jurisdiction was both federal and local in nature. This complex relationship between the federal and local courts became common to the citizens of D.C., whom, for the next 150 years, would see their lives governed by this complicated system, where one's case could start before a local justice of the peace, but end up before a federal appeals court. As a local historian noted, the courts in D.C. acted as a one-umbrella tribunal, covering all facets of D.C. lives. Today, all federal and local courts in D.C. are an offshoot of this original circuit court. In 1806, Judge William Cranch, also the reporter of Supreme Court opinions, became the second Chief Judge of the Circuit Court, and would serve in that capacity for the next 50 years until his death in 1855. In 1863, during the Civil War, President Lincoln abolished the Circuit Court and created a new one, with newly appointed judges sympathetic to the Union. The new court was called the Supreme Court of the District of Columbia, and David Carter became the Chief Judge. At this time, the federal government took back ownership of the building from D.C. In 1868, the solemn statue of President Lincoln was placed in front of the courthouse. The statue was created by the sculptor Lot Flannery, who was at Ford's Theater the evening Lincoln was shot. The statue was the first public monument in Lincoln's honor and originally towered over 30 feet in the air. It was lowered in the 1920s. Some of the more notable trials held in this building include the trial of John Surratt Jr., when tried as John Wilkes Booth's co-conspirator in the assassination of President Lincoln, and the assassination trial of Charles Guiteau in his shooting of President Garfield. The murder trial of Congressman Sickles, the first person to use temporary insanity as a defense in the killing of Philip Key, the son of the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key, who was also an attorney who practiced here for many years. In 1848, the fugitive slave trial known as the Pearl Incident took place here. And finally, in the 1920s, the Teapot Dome scandal, a trial regarding bribery during the Harding administration, occurred in this building. Of course, these halls of our courthouse were also witness to the darker parts of our country's history, including trials regarding slave owner rights in D.C. and the enforcement of the black codes prevalent before the Civil War. Several government agencies used this building, including the Civil Service Commission, under the leadership of Theodore Roosevelt, and the famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass, when he served as the U.S. Marshal for D.C., the first African American to hold this position. By the 1890s, a separate Court of Appeals emerged, distinct from the Supreme Court, and the building at this time was in terrible shape. Recognizing the historical significance of the building, Congress funded a complete renovation, and it was rededicated in 1922 and renamed the U.S. Courthouse. By the 1920s, a distinct federal and local court system began to take real shape, with the D.C. Municipal Court now handling many local judicial functions. In the 1950s and 60s, the growing volume of local litigation placed a strain on all the courts, federal and local. Buildings all over Judiciary Square were being used as courtrooms. When the new federal court building opened in 1952, the Historic Courthouse was being used by the Selective Service System, and in the early 1960s, the building was returned to its original owner, the D.C. government. While the federal courts were exploding with administrative law cases, starting with the New Deal, by the 1960s, criminal law cases were also filling a burgeoning docket. A solution to this ever-expanding caseload was the Court Reform Act of 1970, which finally delineated the federal and local court system we have today. The creation of the Superior Court of D.C. and the D.C. Court of Appeals was solidified, and both were moved into the Moultrie Courthouse in 1978. From the 1970s into the late 1990s, the Historic Courthouse was used by local agencies such as the Corporation Council and the Public Defender Service until the building was shuttered in 1999. In the early 2000s, the D.C. courts began work to return the court to its original beauty and make it the new home for the D.C. Court of Appeals. The Historic Courthouse was officially reopened and dedicated in 2009.
Hello, I'm Chief Judge Anna Blackburn-Rigsby, and I'm thrilled to be celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Historic Courthouse. It's hard to believe that 200 years have passed since this historic courthouse, which served as the original City Hall for the District of Columbia, was constructed. And it's been nearly 11 years since the District of Columbia Court of Appeals returned to this beautiful building. I am so thankful for the honor to serve as your Chief Judge in this truly historic building at this unique time in our history. As you have heard, many notable trials occurred here. Famous attorneys, clients, and notable citizens walked the halls of this historic building. Unfortunately, vestiges of sadder times are also a part of the history of this historic building. As I sit here today, I am reminded that at the time the building was constructed, slavery was legal in the District of Columbia. Upon the enactment of the District of Columbia Emancipation Act in 1862, which freed enslaved persons in the District of Columbia, a commission met right here in this very courthouse to determine the amount of money to pay slave owners for their newly freed slaves. A full understanding of the history of this building, even the darker times, is important as we commemorate this 200th anniversary. I am always encouraged by the many historical figures like former President Theodore Roosevelt and abolitionist Frederick Douglass, and the many judges, lawyers, and dedicated public servants who worked in and walked the halls of this historic building. They worked hard to ensure that justice was accessible to everyone, so that this historic courthouse continues to be a symbol for equal justice for all, here at the heart of Judiciary Square. As a court family, we've faced many new struggles during the past year and a half, including an unprecedented government shutdown, and we're currently in the midst of a historic global pandemic. But through it all, we have served as a shining example of coming together to support one another during trying times, just like this historic building has withstood the test of time these past 200 years. Please join me in thanking the Anniversary Committee, which includes our former Chief Judge, Eric Washington, for their tremendous work in putting together this video tribute. I look forward to celebrating this momentous occasion with you together in the building in the near future. Thank you.
The court now echoes with the voices of the past and present, But through it all, the building has stood tall and firm as a place of justice, standing in Judiciary Square for the citizens of D.C., the United States, and people all around the world. In the end, the Historic Courthouse will always be a place open to all, trusted by all, and justice for all.